Greetings, Helldivers. Ervin here to bring you yet another video on how armor works in Helldivers 2. This is the third time I've made a video on this subject, as it seems every time I document and share the damage you receive and why, Arrowhead comes out with a patch that alters the curve or changes the system entirely. So this time, not only am I going to be covering all the numerical data behind our armor value and how damage mitigation works, I'm also going to be tier listing the effectiveness of the various armor passives as well. Sound good? Cool. Let's take a look at how damage is calculated piece by piece. Your armor absorbs a percentage of the damage you receive, or if you're wearing light armor, is actually amplifying the damage. When you receive damage, if you are in ultralight armor and therefore have 50 armor, you receive 125% damage as a baseline. 64 armor, well, you receive 118%. 70 armor, you take 115%. 79 armor, 110.5% of the damage received. And finally, taking just normal, non amplified damage at medium armor, taking just 100% of the damage received. Past this turning point in the armor calculation, you actually have armor that is reducing the base damage of the enemy. Got 129 armor? Well, you take 85.5% of the damage. 150 armor, you're going to be taking 75% of the damage. And if you happen to be wearing the Marshmallow Man suit, you only receive 65% of the damage. The next calculation made in this stack is whether you do or do not bring the Vitality Booster. Vitality Booster, when taken, applies a multiplicative 20% reduction to the damage received at this stage in the formula, multiplying all our previous results by zero point 0.8. As you can see, this is a very substantial improvement to your survivability across the board. When it comes to boosters, there is nothing more important as the Vitality booster being selected, as it vastly improves the survivability by a similar margin to having 50 more armor across the entire squad. The next phase for the calculation is based on where you're hit. Wherever the attack lands on your Helldiver, damage will be caused to the specific limb's individual health bar. Your arms each have 35 health, making them very easy to break. Your legs, 45 HP, and your torso, 60 HP, as well as your head having 85 HP. When a limb's health is reduced to zero, you suffer an injury. Arms being injured cause an additive 50% reduction to ergonomic stats per arm, causing your arms to wiggle and wobble like you've just come down with a case of super Parkinson's. Note that if your arms are injured, you can still dive and shoot with perfectly centered reticles for those moments of desperation. When you suffer a leg injury, you can no longer sprint and suffer a 15% additive reduction to your movement speed per leg and also lose the ability to sprint. A torso injury will cause you to no longer regenerate stamina and receive 1 damage per second until you die, unless you have Democracy Protects armor equipped or Vitality Booster, which reduces the damage received below 1, causing it to round down to 0. Yet another common Vitality Booster W. What about head injuries? Well, they don't exist, because the next part of our calculation makes it so it's impossible for your head health to hit 0 before your Helldiver flat out dies. This is because you also have a main health pool of 125 health, and this is the actual pool responsible for when you actually die. Note that servo assisted armor passive that gives you 50% injury resistance only impacts the damage your arm and leg health bars receive specifically, and will not impact the damage your main health receives in any way. It's still great for throwing at stratagems like a major league pitcher, but it does not help you stay alive beyond making injuries slightly less common for just those two limbs. Getting back on track though, the damage your main health receives is based on a percent damage carried over from the limbs struck. Your head transfers 150% of the damage, your body 100%, and your arms and legs transfer 85% of the damage we receive after our armor and vitality mitigation to our main health pool of again only 125. It's also important to point out that armor does not impact the damage your head hitbox receives until you have more than 100 armor. And yes, I do mean more than 100, so medium armors gain no additional head protection from armor whatsoever. Let's go over a quick example. Let's say you are hit with a basic laser from a Devastator or Rocket Devastator for a base of 35 damage, and let's pretend it's point blank so the fall off isn't a factor, as that's a whole different video on its own. and you're wearing 70 armor. A 70 armor gives you 15% additional damage taken. You instead take 40.25 damage. At this point, we add in our vitality booster, 20% resistance, bringing the damage down to 32.2. Because our arms have 35 health, this arm is not broken, but it's very close. Next, that 32.2 damage is then multiplied by 0.85 due to the arms transferring 15% less damage to your main health, leaving our main health pool that actually controls if we live or die to receive only 27.37 damage, rounding down to 27 as all damage in Helldivers 2 rounds down. Confused? That's to be expected. Alright, well, that makes sense for the melee attacks and lasers and gunfire, but what about explosions? Explosive damage is not dealt to any limbs, instead, dealing 50% directly to your main health after armor and vitality booster mitigation. In the event you are wearing armor with 50% explosive resistance, it is multiplicative with your 50% base resistance, meaning you take 25% of the explosion, which is then filtered through your armor and vitality booster mitigation. This probably sounds like a lot, and it is, but that's why explosions only come in two forms. Either absurdly high amounts like the Barrager missile fired by Barrager tanks and rocket striders for absolutely no reason, dealing 400 base explosive damage, or very small amounts of explosive damage, like the explosive damage attached to basic rockets, which actually deals much more ballistic damage than explosive. At least with the automatons. Funny enough, all forms of bile on the Terminid front is considered to be explosive, so fortified armor drastically cuts down on the amount of damage received from bile spewers and bile titan vomit, making it an extremely solid pick for any deployment against the Terminids should you be concerned with survivability there. This is especially true when playing ICBM missions, where you have a 100% chance of encountering the Bile Spewer constellation, unless playing a defensive operation, which kind of bugs it at the moment. By the way, I haven't forgotten to make the constellation video, it's just taken a while to make sure I've got all the information I need on the topic. On the topic of odd damage types, though, your fire resistance and gas resistance is also determined by your global damage modifier, except without the explosive resistance 50% reduction. This is why fire and gas hurt significantly less when wearing heavier armors. If you're looking to dive into the specifics of damage you receive on a very in depth and gritty basis, I'll be leaving the chart from earlier in the description in full detail, as well as a link to the helldivers.io/enemies page where you can view the damage our enemies deal to make comparisons and find breakpoints of interest. So now that you have a full understanding of how our armor system functions, let's rank the various armor passives based on how useful they are. Democracy Protect is a B tier passive. It's the best overall when it comes to general survivability, and I cannot deny how fun it is to coin flip death after nuking yourself. However, it only comes on medium armor only. And automatons typically have several instances of damage hitting you in rapid succession, such as lasers or how all the rockets deal half ballistic, half explosive damage. This causes you to roll more 50% chances to die than you might expect, making it feel less effective. Against the Terminids, it is a great passive due to the lower volume of individual hits outside of bile spewing. Against the Terminids, one hit is one hit, no strings attached. Thing is, though, because we only get this passive currently on medium armor, losing the mobility of lighter suits of armor against the Terminids is going to put you in a lot more difficult situations than you'd be in otherwise running a lighter suit. If such a time arrives where we get access to a Democracy Protect suit of light armor, I would rate this passive much higher, as a 50% chance to not die is much more worthwhile when your mobility is high, reducing the average number of hits you take, but those hits are more likely to outright kill you, triggering this passive. Extra padding is a C tier passive, in my opinion. While it does give you 50 more armor effectively, which is great, that's basically another vitality booster, right? Well, kinda. It's in all ways the equivalent to raising your armor by 50, except when taking damage to the head. This means in order to have any additional resistance for your head multiplier, you need to wear the Marshmallow Man 200 armor suit, as it's the only suit with extra padding that has a base armor value higher than 100 to give the headshot resistance. This significantly hurts the value of this passive, especially against the automatons in particular, which much more regularly spike your health bar with headshots. Now, on the other hand, Fortified is an S tier passive. Not only is 50% additional explosive resistance extremely substantial against some of the biggest killers in the game, such as a Barrager and Strider rocket, indirect hits from cannon turrets, factory striders, and bile, it also reduces your crouching and prone recoil by 30%, which is quite substantial on weapons such as the machine gun variants, AMR, and autocannon, just to name a few. Now, this doesn't affect as wide a range of scenarios as Democracy Protects, of course, but the consistency is what I value most here. On top of that added bonus recoil reduction, which, depending on your loadout, can have a much more consistent use case than just when you happen to explode. Now, the electrical conduit is F tier. The only merit of this passive that reduces arc damage by 95% is the fact that it's able to allow you to use your teammates wearing it to extend the arc thrower's range into more enemies from further away at the expense of knocking over your teammates. Well, currently, anyway, intelligence actually suggests the Illuminates will be deployed with arc weapons of their own, making this armor potentially extremely valuable when facing off against the squids, should that be the case. However, until that happens, or if it happens, I've been hearing Meridia's been gurgling rather loud lately, for example. Um, it's gonna stay in the dumpster. Engineering kit is S tier. Our grenades have never been more powerful. Having a couple more HE grenades, frags, stuns, and especially thermites is quite an impactful difference, especially during fast operations such as Eradicates, where the battle is at its most hectic and finding the resupply boxes amidst the chaos can be particularly challenging. Top it off with a 30% crouching and prone recoil reduction we spoke of during the fortified passive analysis, and it's easy to see why this passive is among the best. Inflammable is a D tier passive. 75% fire resistance can make things more comfortable if running a very flamer heavy loadout against the Terminids. However, throwing yourself in the floor is typically sufficient to survive any unfortunate bouncing pixels, and the laser guard dog typically didn't need the fire damage to drop you dead. The Flamer Hulk has been significantly nerfed since its glory days and is typically pretty avoidable. So, the odds this passive comes into play in a way that's more helpful than just having more armor from extra padding, which has good use cases against everything, are pretty few and far between. That all being said, it has a very good use case for fire tornado planets and is a top consideration for those deployments, considering the tornado can otherwise cut off your escape routes and overall make the map more difficult to navigate, elevating it to A tier against those planets. And S tier if you also plan to bring fire based weaponry against Terminids there. Peak Physique is an odd one to place. If you plan to use weapons like the MG43, HMG, and JAR 5 Dominator, the 50% reduction in drag and weapon handling improvements feel like a must have to really get the most out of the weapon. This is especially true when utilizing weapons with poor ergonomics against the Terminids, as they have a tendency to spread wide and far across your screen to flank, requiring quick flicks to react to them, giving this armor passive the special tier of tax tier, as it's like paying the tax for utilizing your poor handling weapons. Outside of those types of weapons, the perk is only currently useful when running the Constitution rifle due to the bayonet receiving the 50% increase in melee damage up to 165 damage, allowing it to one shot hunters to the body and headshot kill warriors in one hit. Should the bayonet be added, though, to the other weapons through the weapons workbench system in the future, we will have to revisit the discussion as to how good this passive is at large. Scout armor is S tier, but only if you engage in stealth gameplay like my community, the Ghost Divers, and only against the automatons where stealth and saboteur style gameplay is at a premium. A 30% reduction in both audio and visual detection ranges on the enemy makes for a far easier time when it comes to avoiding unnecessary combat. I've got a massive video coming out this month talking all about stealth gameplay and divulging every trick and mechanic you need to be aware of to really excel at the playstyle as well. For the Terminids, though, the additional ability to scout with your minimap by clicking around to see what enemies are up ahead is lost half the time due to spores. and the Terminids are much more numerous, making sneaking around them far more difficult. This is alright though, considering the Terminids are typically much easier to take on in a straight up engagement anyway, making the other S tier passives more ideal than the Scout passive when combating them. I, of course, still wear the Trailblazer anyway because I just don't respect them enough to change. Servo assisted is C tier. The 50% resistance to injury is just for your arms and legs, torso unincluded, and it is not often actually useful. As we covered, it doesn't make you actually take any less damage to your main health, which is how you actually die. While extra padding, another passive I put into C tier, not only protects you from injury to a lesser degree due to reducing the damage you receive in general, but it also is reducing the damage your main health actually takes besides headshots. So, how does Servo stay alongside it? Well, the 30% improvement to throwing range is a fantastic utility to have. Being able to lob barrages, especially the walking barrage, much further can allow you to engage super outposts or automaton bunkers from outside the turret's effective range. It also allows you to bait bot drops from extremely far distances onto smaller outposts. There will be no Helldivers near by the time allies arrive to back it up. The only reason this armor isn't rated higher is due to the fact you are much more often than not able to be within the standard range to throw your stratagems anyway, making that 30% extra range nice to have, but very rarely in reality of any necessity or actual considerable merit. I could, however, see how getting used to this throwing range can make it difficult to put it down, as it is quite nice to have. Advanced filtration is F tier. You still take enough damage from the gas that you'll need to stim through it anyway, and unlike with fire, there are no enemies currently who utilize gas against us, meaning we are taking this purely for the sake of traversing through gas strikes and gas grenades, something no one in reality ever actually needs to do. Which is why this armor should have just been 100% gas resistant, as even if it was, the playstyle of standing within your own gas strikes wouldn't be optimal or efficient in any way, just a fun and different way to play the game, which is always a good thing. Unfortunately, this isn't the case, and stacking more armor prevents more gas damage anyway, while preventing damage at large as well. So, into the dumpster with this passive for now. The Unflinching passive is D tier. I used this the entire day it came out to see if I could spot the difference it was making in general combat without resorting to having enemies shoot me as I tried to shoot them for the sake of purely recording what the passive actually did. Not once did I notice any improvements of note during actual gameplay to my ability to resist aim punch, and at first I thought the armor wasn't working, but in reality, what happens is you get shot and your instinct isn't to shoot back. Get shot and your instinct is to stim or get to cover because the next shot is going to kill you. This is especially true due to how this armor passive only shipped on a light and medium variant, making it so your capabilities to fire through being hit without being aim punched become relatively pointless, as continuing to stand your ground and keep shooting instead of stimming is just going to get you permanently aim punched via the eliminated screen. It also doesn't help when it comes to being staggered out of stims, which might be the part of the passive currently not working as intended, as I do have it on good authority the passive is currently not working entirely as it is intended. Hopefully, this passive sees some improvement, as a 95% reduction to specifically aim punch is something you're only going to notice when sustaining fire from very light enemies and utilizing charging weapons or lasers. Lastly, we have the Medkit, which I'm placing into A tier, but only when your squad is running the experimental infusion booster, otherwise it's B. Increasing the duration of your stims is great, and having more of them is also great. However, having access to more healing and resistance on a regular basis does reinforce some bad habits for our Helldivers, and no matter how fast your health is regenerating, you are going to fly through the air from ragdolling all the same. The Medkit passive also only helps as a reactionary defensive measure that all Helldivers already have access to instead of fortified armor, for example, which reduces the explosive damage received on top of being able to stack with a stim and infusion booster, or extra padding for the same reason. It's a strong passive, absolutely. But if your team is good at managing the resupplies, you're not dying or being hit much, and those extra 2 seconds aren't saving the day, this passive won't be in reality doing a lot for you. Likely the best passive for those newer to the game, however, that are prone to making more mistakes and taking more damage, requiring that extra time frame or pseudo immunity. Heavy medic is also extremely strong for tanking your way through damage deliberately, although this strategy is likely the leading cause of I mean, stims have no addictive properties whatsoever. None. Just none. None. Hopefully, this video has brought you some clarity into the armor and health system, as well as given you some insight on the use cases for our armor passives. I sincerely hope this is the last time I feel compelled to make a video on the armor and health system, at least for a while, as the current damage we receive feels like it's fallen into the perfect middle ground between our survivability between the 60-day patch and after. Thanks for watching till the end, and have yourselves a wonderful day. See you next time. This, oh my god, it can shoot like that? Arrowhead, are you okay?